What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to another Swift tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at higher order functions in the Swift programming language, specifically filter, map, and reduce. So we're going to start by jumping into a playground and showing some examples of what these things are, and then we're going to jump into a real xcode project and see how we can use this in a real world example. So with that being said, make sure you smash that like button below and let's get into it. So let's open up xcode here, create a new project. We'll stick with the blank template. Let's call this filter map in reduce. Save it. Let's drag this up here and expand it to give ourselves a little more room to work. Like so. And let's start talking about these functions in order. So filter, map, and reduce are higher order functions, like I mentioned, which is just a fancy way of saying that they are pretty brief in terms of the amount of code you have to write, functions that let you do things in a simple way. So what does that mean? So traditionally, let's say we had an array. Let's call this array. And if we have numbers in it, and it doesn't have to be in order, let's add a couple numbers in here. Let's do a couple more. Traditionally, if you had an array like this, and let's say you wanted to find all the even numbers, you would have to do for number in array, and then you'd have to check if the number is even, and then you have to save it somewhere. So basically, you have to write a for loop. What filter, map, and reduce let us do is do these types of iterations over collections. So in this case, arrays, dictionaries, or sets in a really brief amount of code. So let's actually do it. So let's start. We're going to do filter first, map, and reduce. So filter, as the name implies, lets you filter a collection with a criteria you specify. And at the end of this, we're going to actually print out each of these. So let's put our print statement here. So to filter, we're simply going to say the name of the variable, that's the collection, dot filter. And what we need to do in here is basically specify the criteria for which we want to filter. So in this block, we want to return true or false for each of the elements that we iterate over. To reference the current element, you can do $0. And what we're going to do is we're going to return every even number. So every even number is going to get returned, thus filtering out the odd numbers. So we're going to say return if the current element divided by 2 has a remainder of 0. Thus it would be even. And you can see that the code highlights compiling. And if we come down here, and let's actually, before we run it, let's print this array before we apply our filter to it. And let's come in here and type in before and after. And lastly, let's come down here and hit this play button. And we can see that we start with our super big array with a couple numbers, and then we get an array back filtered with just the even numbers. So pretty nifty. You can imagine if we have a huge array, it's actually a lot less code, and we're using simple numbers, integers here, but you could have a class, which I'll demonstrate in just a second. But let's comment this code out. And to do that type of comment, if you're not familiar, you can highlight a line and hit command slash as if you were commenting, and it'll highlight the whole line. Next, what we're going to do is map. So again, we're going to actually, let's grab this line to print. And map is pretty interesting, and people actually sometimes struggle with what it actually does. Mapping is the concept of applying a transformation to every element in an array. So let's say we give an array of 1, 2, 3, and we want to double each number and basically get an array back of 2, 4, 6. Mapping is a fantastic way to do that. So sticking with that example, we're going to say, what do we call it? Array equals array.map. And in here, we're going to return each element, let's see, times 2. And I don't believe we need the return keyword in here. So if we come down here and clear this out, and let's hit this stop button and then play button again, we should see our initial array. And then we see down here, the same array, but every single value has been multiplied by 2. So you can apply transformations on entire collections with very little code. So again, let's comment this out and let's move on to reducing. So reduction, as the name implies, you can take every element in an array and reduce it into an aggregate value of some sort. It's pretty easy, similar to the other ones. And the way we do it is by saying let results equals the collection dot reduce. And there's 2 variants of reducing. We're going to stick with the one with the initial results. Basically, you pass in what the initial result you expect is. Reduce into is similar, where you specify a collection to reduce into. But let's select this one. We want to sum all of these numbers together. So our initial value is going to be 0. And we're going to specify running sum and value. Don't forget your in keyword. And basically what we want to do in here is we want to say running sum plus value. What this essentially does, as it kind of notates, is every time we iterate over every element in the array, we just add it to our running sum, which by default is 0. So let's actually take this and make this results. Come down here, get rid of this, stop and play again. And we get our running sum, which is this number, which I'm going to assume is correct because math. But yeah, that's basically filter map reduce. Now let's do a couple quick examples with an actual class and not just numbers. So let's say we have a class called person, and this person has a name and a is adult. Let's just stick with that. And we're going to have an initializer of name and is adult. Name doesn't equal name. And, whoops, is adult is going to equal is adult. Like so. So now if we come in here and we create a bunch of these people or person objects, let's say John, true. Let's copy and paste this a couple times. Like so. What we can now do is we can use those higher order functions to perform operations on this. So what I'm first going to do is we're first going to filter out all the people that aren't adults. So we're going to say array.filter, and we're going to basically return if the person $0 is an adult. So now we have all of our adults. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to return the name for all of those people. So right now our array variable has person objects in it that we've created up here, but we want an array with just names in it. So we're going to say array.map, and we're just going to return the name, and we're going to say names of adults. And let's come down here and print this. And hopefully if we hadn't made any mistakes, we can come down and clear this. And before I actually continue, let's actually change the names in here so we can actually tell if we did what we were supposed to do. Let's put a couple more names. What other names are there? Brad, Mark, Brianna. All right, let's come down here and hit this button. So we start with this first thing, which actually doesn't show the thing, but they're person objects, which is the before. And then what we've done is we filtered out all the people that aren't adults, and then we've transformed the array into an array of those adult names. So in this case, we have John, Dale, Eric, and Mark. Let's come back up here and make sure that those all have true. So they all have true as the is adult, and that's an actual example of how you could use filter, map, reduce. So let's actually close up this playground and let's jump into a xcode project. We're going to create a new project and we're going to model this and see what this looks like in a real example. So let's come in here and hit single view application. Make sure you give it a good name. So let's call it filter map reduce project. Double check that you have Swift selected down here. Hit enter and save it. And what we're going to basically model is creating a table view, and we're going to filter out the actual data that we show in the table based on some criteria. So what we're going to actually start by doing is we're going to come into our view controller and set up a few things. The first thing we're going to set up is an outlet to our table. Then we're going to set up a models array, which is going to be an array of strings, like so. We're also going to come in here and set up a UI table view data source. We're going to assign the data source. And if you're not familiar with tables, feel free to just follow the code, but I encourage you to watch several videos I have about tables, which go over the ins and outs of it, and it's super important to learn when you're working with iOS. Anyways, we're going to do number of rows, return models count. Cell for row, we're going to say let cell equals table view DQ reusable cell with an ID of cell and index path. We're going to return the cell at the bottom, and don't forget to assign the text labels text to models and the thing at that position. What we're going to do now is we're also going to create a segmented control. It's kind of like a tab at the top of the user screen. And when the user taps on a segment, we're going to call a function. So let's create a function called did tap segment. And let's see, we're going to have sender is a UI segmented control. And we're going to say if sender dot selected segment index is 0, do something, otherwise do something else, and reload data on the table view. Whoops, table.reload data. That's not what we want. Table.reload data. So we are going to basically show a table view with everything in it in terms of the models on the screen. When the person selects the first tab in the segmented control, we're going to filter some stuff out, and then again we're going to filter stuff out when they select any other tab. So let's start by putting stuff in our models. So let's put in let's see, let's put in names again. Let's make sure they're all lowercase. Stick with some J names, we'll filter them out. What else starts with J? Joey. Let's put in some names that start with a D. Cool. So now we're gonna set up our storyboard and we're gonna actually implement our filter functions. So let's go to main.storyboard. And the first thing we're gonna start by doing is we're going to nest this entire view controller into a navigation controller by coming up here and hitting editor. And we're going to do embed in navigation controller. Then we get this bar up here. So come on up here and look for UI segmented control. Drag this guy into the bar and drop it in like so. We get a first and second. Let's connect the action we created to this segmented control. If it lets us, so looks like it won't let us. So let's add the table view first and see why that function won't connect. Let's put the table view in here. Let's connect this to the table outlet. Make sure you come down here and add a couple of constraints. We're going to do zeros for all the values. And we want to bump this prototype cell number, which creates this prototype cell. Let's set its cell identifier. We called it cell. And let's head back to our view controller and see why we can't connect this IB action. Let's see, did tab segment. Let's see if we compile, if we have any errors. We shouldn't if we've done everything correctly. We don't. We built successfully. Let's head back to our storyboard and see why this has given us a hard time. Let's drag from this. There we go. Maybe we just needed to build it first. Make sure you select value changed. And let's go back to our view controller, hit Command R to build and run, and we should see all of our names in the table. Hopefully. Yep, perfect. Now if we click this up here, nothing actually happens. So what we're going to do is implement that. So when we click the very first tab, this zeroth index, we want to filter out all the names that start with D. So we're going to say models equals models.filter. And basically we're going to say $0 dot starts with, I believe, we're going to start with J. And here we're going to say starts with D. And let's actually move this entire initial creation of the models to a different function. We're going to say setup models. And we're going to make sure we call this initially. The reason we need to do that is because when we select a section index, we're going to call the function again after we remove all. Because once we filtered it the first time, if we select something again, we're not going to be able to filter from the initial batch of names in here because we've already filtered it. So let's hit Command R and see what we get. So as you can see, we start off with all of our names in here. We have our J names and our D names. If we hit this first index, looks like we still have our J and D names. Set the second index, and we get the D names. So the reason this one actually didn't work is because the initial launch of the app is already selected on this. So let's select this now. We'll see our J names. Perfect. So J, D, J, D. So let's actually clean this up a little bit. So instead of selected index 0, we're going to do 1 there. And we're going to take this and make this 2. Head back to your storyboard. And in the segmented control, let's add one more segment. And you do that by coming up here and bumping this number. And we're going to change the titles in here. If it lets us. It's giving us a hard time. Cool. Now let's hit Command R to build and run. And it looks like we botched something. Let's check our errors. We're saying selected index equals 1. We're doing an else. We need an else if in here. Build and run. And by default, we're on the initial index at first. If we hit J, we get all the names of J. If we hit D, we get all the names of D. So you can imagine how this could be useful in, let's say, the default phone app on your iPhone where we filter out missed calls and other call history, where Apple probably uses a bool to return if a call is missed or not. So yeah, there you have it. That's how you use filter, map, reduce, higher order functions in the Swift programming language. If you haven't done so already, make sure you smash that like button below for the YouTube algorithm. If you're new, welcome to the channel. Subscribe for daily Swift tutorials. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.